Okay, we're on. We're live. A very good morning to everybody joining from India, and a very good evening from those joining from the US. We apologize for the slight delay in starting the meeting. Some unforeseen issues unfortunately cropped up, and we were trying to troubleshoot them. So, thank you for your patience. I am Sunidhi Hegde. I will be your moderator for the event. On behalf of Raah Foundation's Center for Policy Research and Action, I am delighted to welcome you all to the webinar series, The Raah to Thriving Sahyadris. We celebrate the launch of our policy research wing on the event of World Water Day. We dedicate the first edition of our webinar series to discover challenges and solutions for the Northern Western Ghats or the Sahyadris through water security. I'd like to inform all the participants that if you have any questions for the panelists, you may drop them down as the event progresses, and our team will select the most pertinent ones. Also, just a small change to our schedule. We will be having the panel discussion first and the keynote followed by it. Just to quickly introduce you to the topic of our webinar, the Sahyadris or the Northern Western Ghats are not only a biodiversity hotspot, but they're also a lifeline for millions of people. They supply water that sustains forests, farms, and communities. Despite high rainfall, the mountains have a significant amount of water insecurities. To make matters worse, climate change has bared its teeth. Issues like erratic rainfall and rapid land use changes have been persistent. Water security in this region is increasingly under threat. Today, we'll explore how ecological restoration, community driven initiatives, and scientifically backed solutions can secure a sustainable water future for this vital region. Today, we have an exceptional panel of experts with us. Each of them bring a unique perspective to the table. Firstly, we have Dr. Gurudas Nulkar, an esteemed ecologist and professor at Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, whose work on watershed management and community engagement has had a lasting impact on water governance. His Marathi book, Anarth Shastra, received um, the C.D. Deshmukh Award in Economic Literature from the Government of Maharashtra. We're happy to have you with us today, sir. Secondly, we have Joe Roque Fernandez. He's an alumnus of IIT Kharagpur and IIM Calcutta. He's the co-founder of IITians for Influencing India's Transformation. Their program, Restore Promise of Water, is a pioneer in watershed management, which focuses on reviving traditional tank desilting practices while using technology to improve water security and operational transparency. Last but not the least, we have Arun Sarayu Kamath. She's the head of Regreen Nation, which is Raah Foundation's climate action program. She has led rewilding efforts in the Northern Western Ghats that have significantly enhanced groundwater recharge and ecological resilience. She's also an alumnus of IIT Bombay. Welcome, all the panelists, Dr. Nulkar, Joe, and Sari.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and welcome to everybody here.
Thank you.
To set the stage, let's start by understanding the current scenario. Water security in the Northern Western Ghats is shaped by a unique interplay of geography, climate, and human activities. From your perspective, what are the most pressing water related challenges the region faces today? Let's hear from each of you briefly. I'd request Dr. Nulkar to begin and then Sariyu and then Joe and Sariyu.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be with the distinguished guests like Joe and Sarayu and the others. To begin with your question about, what are the most pressing challenges in the Western Ghats, a couple of them come to my mind, and this is also from the experience that we have been working in the Western Ghats. Um, like you said, the Western Ghats geography and climate has evolved over millions of years. However, there are a couple of things which have changed dramatically in the last few years, especially in the last couple of decades. One, of course, is the in your face climate change and the amount of rainfall that we are getting. So, the total amount of rainfall that we get in the Western Ghats has hardly changed. However, what has changed is the periodicity. So we are getting the same amount of rainfall in a lesser duration and in more intense spurts. So that is causing huge amounts of natural disasters that we have seen in the Western Ghats. A couple of years back, we studied the landslides of Western Ghats, and we counted more than 1,500 landslides which have happened in just one season. So, what are the repercussions of such things of natural disaster? The first and the biggest repercussion happens on the soil. There is a very thick layer of soil in the Western Ghats. Almost in some places, you get soil cover of almost about 30 to 40 feet deep. Now, as the rain intensifies and the periodicity reduces, the soil saturates with the water and the flows start on the bedrock. The bedrock is at the bottom of the thick layer of the soil. And when this happens, there is an entire soil, there is an entire thick slab of soil which slides down, exposing the entire bedrock. And we have seen this happen in places in the Western Ghats. Now, what does it mean for the water there? What it means for the water is that the steep slopes of the basalt are exposed, and this intense rainfall is now going to flow down instead of percolating down into the mountains. This has significantly changed the amount of groundwater percolation which happens there. When there is no soil cover, when there is less tree cover, then water flows are more intense and they carry away much more mud than they usually would have done. And so this starts, it's like a positive feedback loop where it gets intense every year. So to me, that is one of the biggest challenges which is happening. And the second biggest challenge which is happening is the changes in the land use, which is happening in Western Ghats. Traditionally, there have been farming practices on the steep slope and in the valleys. Today, these villages, these settlements in the higher altitudes are getting older and older. All the youths are migrating to Mumbai, Pune kind of cities. Now, when the family gets old, they are unable to till on these intense slopes. And what they can do is to increase their livestock and let them away for grazing, free range grazing. This has changed the land use, which means today we want grasslands, we don't want forests. And therefore, around February, around Shimga season, there are forest fires in the Sahyadris. And this significantly changes the tree regeneration there, and therefore the soil cover, the intensity, blah blah blah. So this is a positive feedback which happens, reduces the groundwater percolation, increases the flooding possibilities in the foothills of the hills. So I'll pause there and come back later.
Thank you, Dr. Nolkar. That was very informative. Joe, can we have you?
Thank you, Sunadi, and thank you, everybody. Glad to have you there, Dr. Nulkar. That was very well put. I'll therefore just take a slightly different perspective. Firstly, I have actually moved to this Sahyadris. I've moved to a project here on the Mumbai-Pune highway, and I'm looking out of my window, and I can actually see the range of the Sahyadris in front of me. When we moved here, we were excited. I lived in Bangalore. And we were excited by being in nature, being closer to better AQIs, long treks in the mountains. And then one of the phenomenon that kind of really hit us right in the face is we would have wonderful AQIs till about 5 or 6 p.m. every day. And then they would start steadily rising. And they would cross 100, 115 by the night. And the next morning, they would start going down again. And we were surprised by seeing this. We were like, what's going on? We're supposed to be in the mountains. And then I noticed as I started walking were fires. And these were naturally created fires by the community. Some of them were coal burning fires for brick making. Some of them were just burning their grasslands to keep warm. Some of them were preparing their land for the next season. We've seen that in Punjab as well. The other phenomenon we saw was in many of these communities. So I'm living in one of these projects. In many of these projects, they didn't like the bees that were there. They felt that, hey, these bees are pests, right? Because you're living here as a community and you don't want bees coming into your home. I also talked to the security guards who were living in my complex and understood from them, like, what's going on in your village and what's going on. They said, we don't do kheti bari anymore. We don't do farming. He didn't even go back for Holi. I had a whole bunch of security. I said, where do you live? They said, we live in the nearby village. And I said, why aren't you there celebrating Holi? He said, well, today's urban work style doesn't let me do that. And for me, when I look at it, the big aha for me was very different. I think there's a whole bunch of issues that exist. And yes, climate and environment are creating problems. And you have the issues of groundwater recharge and deforestation. You have the issues of the soil conditions and everything else. But fundamentally, what I felt is the community has lost their sense of ownership and purpose in preserving their own futures. And so when I see what's the biggest challenge is how do you reconnect communities, to what it really means to be part of an ecosystem and what their ownership is around that. And I'm almost reminded, I was in the US for many years, and one of the funny things in the US that I remember was talked about in schools is where does your milk come from? And many of the school kids said it comes from a carton. And they forgot where it fundamentally comes from. And I think we fundamentally have forgotten our connect with nature and our sense of coexistence with nature and how some of these things, how bees, how we live, how we burn and whether we burn or not makes a difference. Our own ability to preserve our water structures and our forests. And I believe that the biggest challenge that I find is that there are a lot of great projects. Everybody understands the science, everybody understands the issues, there's lots of money being spent. But the three stakeholders are the most engaged are the foundations and NGOs, the corporations who are investing, the government with their schemes and the policies. And the community is never part of the change in a fundamental way, in an absolutely fundamental way, where their ownership of why this is important to them and how this can restore the promise of water that's important to them becomes centered to it. And for me, that's the biggest challenge. It's so easy to forget the community. It's so easy to say, let's just go and do stuff because, why not? And why won't things then become better? But we've studied as IIT several large World Bank, UN, large state programs, and we've studied transformation that's taken 5 years to build and 5 years to return back to where it was a status quo. And in all the cases when we've gone and talked to the community, it was nobody talked to me. They never did it because of me. They did it because of them and some other policy need. And so for me, I'm just going to stop there. The biggest challenge is how do you design for community to be the center of what you're doing? Otherwise, for me, it's meaningless.
That gave me goosebumps. If I'm to be very honest, it's so true that you say that we have lost the connect to nature, and I think this is a good time for Sarayu to come in because she often talks about how nature needs to heal. Sarayu, can we hear from you?
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Gurdas Nulkar, and thank you, Joe, for your wonderful insights. And I really have experienced all of this on ground, especially communities. So we started rewilding on Western Ghats. So why Western Ghats? I mean, I think all of us are aware. I mean, as Sir Dr. Nulkar just put the context in place. The saddest thing is that, and the ironical thing is that it rains almost 3,000 mm of rainfall on the Western Ghats, and yet, come September, come December, have people from the tribal communities walking about 3 hours for drinking water, and by the time it's summer, April and May, they're walking 5 hours for drinking water. So this is the ground reality. And when we talk of water scarcity, we often think of Rajasthan and Kutch and places like that. But no, bang on the Western Ghats where it rains 3,000 mm of rainfall, we have dire water scarcity. So of course the reasons are plentiful, as Dr. Nulkar also said, talked about massive deforestation is a huge cause, and there's a lot of runoff that happens. uh, the hydrogeology is such that there is hard compact basalt rock on the top and very poor and fractured aquifer system. We have a couple of rivers which flow in the region. I'm talking of Northern Western Ghats in Maharashtra, where which are dammed up, and guess what? The water comes to cities like Mumbai and Pune. There are small check dams in the region which have been constructed by the government, but they are heavily silted and leaking very badly. So net result, is results in people walking for hours for water, and very often people just give up and they migrate to the cities. So this is the saddest part. They migrate to places like Boisar, like Thane, and complete loss of the tribal cultures and their life, break in education for the children. So this is the ground reality. What we are facing, apart from the massive landslides that we just heard from Dr. Nulkar. So, what we are doing now is a process of bringing back the lost forests, of restoring landscapes, of conservation using techniques like rewilding. And of course, we learned the hard way. First, we wanted to get ourselves technically correct, what species to plant, where to plant, what is the spacing, what to plant when there's less soil, what do we plant when there's more soil, what species to plant so the community also gets some income, so all of that, how to identify invasive species, how do we remove them, how do we create fire lines, we got all of that technically right. And of course we learned it the hard way that we did not engage with the community, and now we are now building up the barriers. So now we are right now working in about 7 villages, and we have started creating Gram Vikas Samitis. We've already created them in about 3 of the villages where we are working, and we are really seeing that participation increase in small things, So we had a forest fire, and unfortunately, most of the forest fires are man-made. Okay, almost 99% of them. And somebody throwing a careless BD or a cigarette, or there's a burning garbage, things like that. And we had a small forest fire, and in the place where we had created the Gram Vikas Samitis, and the entire village came to put out the forest fire. They called up the local fire brigade. They had all of that, and they were all with us. And vis-a-vis, just a few months back, we had a forest fire in another place where the Gram Vikas Samiti has yet to be set up, and nobody from the village came to put out the fire, and it was just the Raah team putting it out. So I honestly believe that engaging local community is the only way to go, to create that awareness, to create the stewardship, the leadership, where they engage and they take responsibility for the forest, to create employment opportunities, to create livelihood opportunities that are dependent on the forest. So if the forest survives, then they get the income, so we can think of ecotourism, we can think of beekeeping, and of course there is NTFP, all of that. But we have to go that extra mile to make sure that we set up the market linkages, so their livelihoods are truly more meaningful, and which are dependent on the forest. And I really feel that that is the way to go.
Thanks a lot, Sarayu. You answered the first question that I had for you. So I think we can move on to my question for Dr. Nulkar. Dr. Nulkar, your involvement with Pani Panchayat really fascinates me. Pani Panchayat emphasizes data-driven management to address water scarcity. In your line of work, how has integrating traditional knowledge with modern data analytics, uh, how does it work? How does it enhance community-led water conservation efforts, and how do we really engage with the community that way?
Yeah, I think yeah, Pani Panchayat has been working for the past so many years, since the 1972 drought in Purandar district, on a very specific theme, and that is about water justice. Right. And one of the founding principles of Pani Panchayat is that every family, irrespective of whether they hold a land or no, is entitled to a fixed amount of water available throughout the year. Right. And so this was something which Vilasrao Salunke proposed much before Eleanor Ostrom, made her principles of managing the commons. And so this was a seminal thing. So coming to today, fast forwarding to today, what is Pani Panchayat and what are we talking about? So one of the things that we looked at in Pani Panchayat is data-driven water security. Uh, See there, when you talk about the social use of water, there are basically only four things which matter. One is the availability of water, which is what nature gives us, the precipitation which happens. Second is the distribution of water. How are we distributing it? Third is what is the use of water? And finally, what is the quality of water? So if you look at these four things, and if you are able to measure these four things, then we can solve a lot of problems. Because like we always say, what's measured improves. So if you start measuring what is available water, what is your watershed getting in terms of precipitation, how are you distributing it? How much are you leaving for agriculture? How much are you leaving for household consumption? How much are you leaving for environmental based flows? Nature also requires water. So we have to leave some water for nature, because there is a natural irrigation which happens in forest, groundwater recharge, all of these things require, as well as aquatic life, all of that need water. And finally, what is the quality of water? And when you talk about the quality of water, what fundamentally comes to your mind is upstream and downstream. So those villages which are upstream have an advantage if they start polluting, because they get fresher water. For example, I live in Pune. We are at the foothills of Sahyadris. We perhaps get some of the best water quality in the entire country. If you look at other cities like Hyderabad, Bangalore, Delhi, all of them are downstream and they get all the pollution which comes in from that. But at Pune, our dams are at the foothills and we get really, really great quality of water. So this is very important to understand the logic of being upstream and downstream, and thus quality comes into play. And for us as Punekars, we have a cardinal responsibility to clean our sewage and send it down to Sholapurkars, because that is going to be their drinking water. Do we even consider that? And the answer is no. I mean, municipal corporations shy away from their duties of cleaning water and leaving better quality of water downstream. So this is also what comes in data-driven water management, right? If you show what is the water quality, how much is available, what is the use, and how are you distributing it, I think these four fundamental factors will kind of make community aware of what needs to be done. A lot of what happens today is because we don't have data. So for example, if Punekars were asked to store water in a transparent container and use it throughout the week, every day I would go out of the house and look at where the level in the container is. And now imagine when that container is a dam, which is located 100 kilometers upstream, I have no clue, which means I'm going to use water for washing cars or, curating golf courses and things like that, while having no clue about how much is the water content. So data becomes a fundamental, it becomes a foundation for water justice and therefore water security.
Wonderful, Dr. Nolkar. May I just ask you to reiterate what the four um, qualities were so that we can just
Yeah, I talked,
availability
see,
of water?
availability, distribution, use, and quality, out of which availability is purely by the hydrological cycle. We have no control on it, right?
Yes.
Distribution, use, and quality is completely driven by human use, and that is controllable.
Understood. Uh, my next question is for Joe. Joe, your work with RPOW focuses on reviving traditional tank desilting practices to improve groundwater recharge. How has data-driven insight, how have data-driven insights and technology for operational transparency and monitoring have strengthened these efforts to guide ecological restoration initiatives?
Thank you. So firstly, I just want to correct what ARPA represents. It's a mission statement, and reviving the traditional desilting practices is just one of the solutions that is part of ARPA. It's our most prominent one. I know our website, and I apologize, only kind of shares that because that's the one we've been working on for the last few years. But now there are several others. For example, we've just finished codification of a spring shed solution that the Hinduja group is working with Chirag in the Northern Himalayas, very relevant to the area here. We're kicking off a process to codify a community approach to afforestation and agroforestry. And it's based on the work of several foundations in this region, including what Raah Foundation is doing and Sarayu is doing. Our portfolio currently represents several other similar things being codified, including water quality areas, including farm practice areas, and several others. And technology and data is the key to what we use for codification. And what do we do it for? Is when we codify, going back to the first area we talked about, we try to see how we can use technology and data to make community at the center of the process that's being defined. And in that design of the codification process, community is the center, NGOs and implementing partners are the facilitators, private donors are catalysts, and government schemes and policies are what you can converge with. And that's the design of the system that gets codified. And so always communities at the center. So firstly, we define a tech and data-driven process that how can you design with community at the center? So in our, for example, desilting practices, where is there higher stress? How can you engage the Gram Panchayat? How can you engage the farming community? Keep them at the center through a process that is governable, but where everybody follows the process, keeping them at the center. The second way we use technology and data is how do you visualize this maturity with communities at the center? How do you visualize adoption? How do you visualize relevance? Each solution has got different relevance in different parts of the country. What's the opportunity for a certain area, afforestation? What's the opportunity for spring shed? What's the relevance and what's the adoption maturity of the community? Can you visualize this? And again, data and technology helps us do that. And so this is what we've really invested in. And now we represent a portfolio of more than 12 nationally relevant solutions. But the technology and data is always about how is community at the center of how you get it done, and how does community representation remain at the center of how you visualize where you are in your journey. And that's how we use technology and data for execution of anything.
Fascinating. That's absolutely fascinating. Sari, I just have a very small question for you since we already addressed what Regreen is about. Um, can you just tell us about what you often tell us how the rewilding efforts have really ensured groundwater recharge and how you've found certain ponds and other water bodies that have lasted for longer than earlier?
Yeah. So, quickly about rewilding. So, what we do is we work with the communities, and typically it is on commons so far. Most of what I do at Regreen Nation is on commons. We work with Gram Panchayats, we work with the forest department. So, all of our 1,200 acres that we have done in Nasik has been on commons. So, what we do is we first start with a Gram Sabha where we actually explain the entire process of conservation and of ecological restoration using rewilding techniques to the entire village. And then a resolution is passed where they will actually conserve in the sense. So conservation at ground, okay, is the first step is protection. So protection from grazing and protection from wood felling. So what we do is, suppose a village has 100 acres, we ask the community what is the land that they need for grazing, and we keep that aside for grazing. And the balance, we say that nobody should come, no grazing, no wood felling for 5 years. So we take care of the livestock. Now, when this happens, the succession starts. So what is succession? So we have the grasses that start growing, and they come up thick and tall. They grow up to 4 feet, 5 feet, 6 feet even. And when the grasses grow, we get the insects. The insect population goes up. When the insect population grows up, we have the bird that come in to feed on the insects. So there's a party going on. And when the bird population goes up, there are droppings. The droppings act as manure. The droppings also have seeds of some fruit or berry that the bird has eaten earlier, and biodiversity kicks in. Now, just imagine this entire landmass, 1,200 acres. We have so much of biomass coming up. We have so much of grass coming up, and every blade of grass, every plant, okay, acts as a micro dam. Okay, it's holding the water, it's holding the soil. Okay, and then what we found, and of course now we have started proper scientific studies, but so far we've just been measuring water at the foothills because we didn't expect nature to respond so fast. So in this village of Dari, where we've been doing our work, we found that at the foothills there are about 18 wells, and we started monitoring them. And we found that in a year's time, so we started the plantation sometime in the major plantation was in 2023. And every month we've been in the non-rainy season, we've been measuring the water levels in the wells at the foothills. And we found that out of 18 wells, 10 wells have been performing much better than the previous year. So, of course, it is, it's just 1 year, and we have to do an extended study over a period of time, to actually infer that it is the intervention that has resulted in the increase of water in the well. So, we are now engaging with the Aqua Dam, who will do, serious studies about how our intervention is going to impact the aquifer recharge, in all the areas that we are working. And hopefully in about couple of years time, we should have a proper case study that, does the inference. But right on ground, and this is what, we are seeing, and some of the farmers are really thrilled, and then, they're realizing the value of the forest coming back, and they're getting more water in the wells, and they want to start a rabi crop. And that's what they say, that if this continues, they're going to start another crop. So, I mean, of course, and we always believe that it's only with ecological security will we have water security, will we have biodiversity security, will we have nutrition security, will we have financial security, and finally social security.
That's wonderful. Honestly, this one incident about more water in just about 10 wells is such a positive reinforcement for us at Raah Foundation that it honestly encourages every single team that is associated with Green Foundation, and we're so proud of the work. Sarayu.
Thank you.
My next question is for Dr. Nolkar. Dr. Nolkar, in your publication on the restoration templates with the Sahyadri, you discuss strategies for ecological restoration. Could you elaborate on the specific restoration approaches that have proven effective in the Northern Western Ghats?
See, Northern Western Ghats are a very unique region because there has been severe deforestation which has happened historically, right? From when the invasions were happening and all these forts were being built, all of that. So most of the forests which you see today are a secondary regeneration of forest, right? And therefore you see a lot of Kinzer, Ain, kind of varieties which are more towards the deciduous type rather than some of the evergreen parts which you find in the Devrais, which is the sacred groves. So the sacred groves are the ones which really hold the old term vegetation there. One of the things what comes to our mind when we talk about restoration is we tend to look at biological restoration as the easy way out, right? But if you look at nature, the speciation has happened. All the species, there was one single cellular organism which dominated the planet around 3.5 billion years ago. That was the prokaryote. From that single fellow, today we have a phenomenal diversity of life. The reason why this happened is because the biological diversity essentially is a manifestation of the physical conditions. So in restoration, what needs to be the cornerstone of a good restoration policy is physical restoration, restoration of abiotic elements, understanding the relationship between abiotic and biotic elements. That is what gives us the ecosystem services. So what is the physiology of the region? What has been the terrain, the undulations, the habitats? All of those are very important to be understood first. Biological restoration, of course, is extremely important and necessary, but it's not sufficient. We need to start with physical restoration first. And for that, like I said earlier, there's been a loss of soil cover for so many years because of deforestation, because of grasslands, and so on and so forth, and forest fires, all of that. So, in physical restoration, the first thing which comes to our mind is protection. That becomes the first thing that you need to do. And what do you protect the area from? We need to protect it from human activities. So, right, farming, grazing, deforestation, taking away firewood, all of these are the first things which you need to do. As sir, you rightly said, nature has a phenomenal capacity to bounce back. The only thing which you need to do is to protect it and allow it to bounce back. Now, that becomes the first step in Western Ghats, also in the Northern Western Ghats, especially, where you have to look at the physical diversity and bringing back those habitats, the physical diversity, and then the biological diversity is going to come up. We just need a basic assisted restoration. We don't need a completely human intervened restoration. Of course, some areas do need that because they are highly degraded, and then what has been degraded unnaturally has to be brought back into that capacity. So therefore, that is there. So that I think is the cornerstone of ecological restoration, to understand the physical diversity, to engage, to find out what is the traditional old growth forest, by looking at devrais, by looking at sacred grove forest, looking at the land use change. And the most important thing is, how are the local communities using the landscape? And that needs to be managed. The success of a restoration program is not when you start planting trees, but how you manage the communities to use the natural resources which they have been endowed with. Right. And today, what has happened is, more often than not, we will see communities over extracting the resources beyond the assimilative capacity of the landscape. So that also becomes a crucial factor in managing restoration. And finally, after you do that, then you go to the plantation part. One of the most important things there again is to remove the invasives. We have a lot of invasives in the Northern Western Ghats. We have lantana, we have suba we have prosopis, we have gliricidia. All of these have invaded. Even Nilgiri today, and as well as teak. All much of these teak is escaped from plantations, and therefore you see a lot of teak which is coming out. So some of it has to be managed, some of it has to be controlled, some of it has to be planted. All of these things are what are going to get back the natural capacity and the ecosystem services of the Western Ghats.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nulka, for that. I'm glad that you mentioned Devrais. Let me just take this opportunity to also highlight that the Raah Foundation's Center for Policy Research and Action has brought out a report on on a comparative analysis of sacred groves around the world, and also the legal and policy insights on how conservation of these sacred groves can be brought out. We'll obviously share the report with you once it's out. Just to digress from the topic just very slightly, Joe, I have a question for you. You often mentioned, you have repeatedly mentioned how communities are very central to the work that you do at RPAW. How has decentralized government models empowered local communities to take ownership of the water conservation and watershed management? And what do you think are the kind of policy interventions that are needed to incentivize that kind of long-term community stewardship?
Thank you for that. So for us, again, the answer is very simple. The most powerful incentive in the world is economic. All of us are driven by economic incentive. And what we've discovered, not just in the desilting program, but in every solution we codify, is how do you take cognizance of that economic underpinning? For example, in this traditional desilting, we've studied that any farmer will get a return of investments in 6 months for their entire outlay if they participate in desilting, if they bear 100% of the cost. They don't need donor, they don't need government. If they bear 100% of the cost, they will get an ROI in 6 months. And for the next 5 years at least, they will have increased earnings of 30 to 50%. Right? Now, just look at that incentive. Now, what we've therefore recognized is most solutions don't clarify that economic incentive. We focus on so many other pieces, and therefore the community doesn't get a sense of the economic value of what they're participating in. And therefore, the strongest tool you can create is create that link in the knowledge base you create in the community of the economic incentive that's underpinning what they're getting participating in. And there are three things you have to keep in mind, therefore, to make this happen. The first is equity and agency to ensure that everyone can participate. It cannot be a solution where the larger farmers or the larger community members benefit. It has to be everybody. And so that's the first piece. How do you make sure that this is an inclusive, equitable, and agency built solution for everybody? The second is how do you connect the data for that community to help them see that linkage of the economic value that they're deriving from their participation, and build that with data, share that with data, do it in workshops. And then the third is how do you make collective ownership? Again, taking advantage of the decentralized collective bodies that exist, farmer producer organization, self-help groups, gram panchayat communities, your pani panchayats. These are collective agencies. How do we make sure that they now take cognizance of this so that they become the voice to collectively sustain this economic value for water security? I'm going to go a step further. We've seen that this economic value story through collective agency can be driven for corporates. So for our Springshed solution, we've mapped the largest blocks of industrial consumption in the Himalayas, right? In this entire Uttarakhand area. And we've mapped the value that can be created from collective Springshed restoration that is upstream of where you're consuming water. And we've seen that collectively, 12 companies, 12 large brands can restore more than 200% what industry currently collectively uses downstream through using community ownership Springshed restoration, right? And that's data driven now. So think of now their value where every year people say Central Groundwater Board, I may not get my license, what am I paying for? And you've created an economic incentive that if you participate and you drive Springshed restoration at scale, you're secure for your business for a long time to come. I'm going to go a step further. Policymakers, district administration, states, they want business to come into the area. They want their people to be successful. Think of creating the economic incentive now for them as a district collector, that if you sponsor the right schemes in the Sahyadris, and this is what's happening to your community, and this is what's happening to your businesses, then you're going to get a lot more coming into your region. And so this economic incentive value can be done at a gram panchayat, SHG, farmer producer, for a collective of corporates in that area, for a district in terms of what their footprint is. But it's the same simple thing. Why should you do it? What's your economic value? And for us, that is it. If you can figure that out and bring out the data for it, you've got a winner.
That is actually very insightful. Thank you for that, Joe. Sariu, I have one last question for you. What you're the person who is on field every single day, day in and day out. What policy changes or incentives do you believe are necessary for rewilding itself? You interact with the Zilla Parishad on a regular basis. What do you need from the government to ensure that we are helping the communities and the nature that the intervention area serves?
Yeah. So we are one of the important stakeholders, when we are restoring the habitats. We bring in funds through CSR, through private philanthropy from overseas. Okay, and these funds are used for, saplings, for labor. They're used for setting up irrigation systems, all of that. We also engage deeply with the community. We create employment opportunities. We setting up livelihoods, all of that. But what we really need, okay, is we need large parcels of land where, we can do restoration work. And so right now we are doing bits and pieces, and while it is having impact already, but it is still localized. But when we do restoration on large parcels, okay, at least, so our goal is to restore 50,000 acres by 2030. So if you're doing that, we need at least every year 5,000 hectares of land that we need to work on. So, and the guys who have this largest parcel of land are the forest department. They're also the ones who have the longest red tape to get anything moving. So, especially in Maharashtra, we've set up, such huge, speed breakers, so to speak. So we have to have a tripartite agreement. It has to go to the local office. There has to be a committee. It has to go to Nagpur. It has to go to Mantralaya. It has to go to the minister, even the chief minister. So when there's such pressing problems on Western Ghats and everybody knows that, we have no choice but to bring back those forests, and yet when we want to implement on ground, you have so many speed breakers, so it takes literally forever. And we haven't, we've been working 8 months for a certain piece of land. After 8 months, and literally spending almost 8 to 10 lakhs on, creating a detailed project report and all of that. They just say it's not possible. And now I have to start another parcel of land, so it's extremely difficult. And you talk to any of the NGOs and nobody wants to work with forest department. This is a big problem. Okay, and yet we have, on the other flip side, we have states like Madhya Pradesh, okay, and who are actually inviting investments from CSR, from CER. They're offering carbon credits, so all of that. I mean, you literally have to lay the carpet for people to come in to work. And of course, we can have, the forest department check out credentials, what's the experience, what is the technical know-how you bring, if they can have governing mechanisms, monitoring mechanisms. But let's do that and get moving, so we really need to, do these things on absolute high priority. Now, forest department themselves have planted a lot of Clearicidia of lantana in the past years, okay? They are not bothered. I mean, it's not in their policy to start removing them and start replacing them. And they're creating havoc. They're not allowing our native species to, grow. So as a policy, they should be doing that themselves. Okay, so this is another thing I see. Uh, we also having trouble with implementing Narega. While Narega is a brilliant solution, okay, at the center level, it ensures 100 days of labor employment. And we use this facility for many of our activities, like creating pits, for plantation, for creating fire lines, for removal of invasive species. So we use Narega. But practically on ground, the labor has not been paid for 3-4 months. Okay. And yet Raah Foundation, to incentivize the labor, we pay them a top up. So Maharashtra government gives 297 rupees for every labor per day. And we top it up with 103 rupees per day. So, in their mind, the labor is getting 400 rupees a day, which is kind of reasonable. And as Joe said, that is the economic incentive for them to come and work. But if they're not getting paid that 297 for 4 months, I mean, why will they come to us? And in, a lot of places in Maharashtra, and especially in Nasik where we work, we have onion fields, we have grape fields, we have tomato fields and capsicum, so, and near the cities, they have the cities where there's, building happening. So why will they come to us? So they will come to us if, because we are giving them employment right in their locality, right where they live, right, they don't have to go to the village. I mean, so that is for them a big plus, but they need to be paid on time. So these are some of the, ground things that we need to work on. And lastly, I want to mention is that one of the biggest reasons for deforestation is the demand for fuel in the local communities. I mean, that's really the elephant in the room. While we say, mining and development, but no, poverty and the fuel demands that drive, in the local community. And this we've seen. So when we go to any village where, we are restoring the landscapes, and we ask them, and it's all barren right now, and we ask the elderly people who are like 80 plus, what was here when you were young? And without exception, everybody says there were dense forests, there were tigers, they say. Okay, now there were dense forests. Then we ask them, then what happened? They say we cut the trees. For what? I mean, we don't have a means of livelihood, so they cut the trees and they sold it, as timber. And of course they never bought it to put it back. But now they also cut it for timber. They also cut it for firewood, which they're doing even today. And while, the funny thing is that a lot of them have gas connections. Okay, so almost 90% of the families have gas connections. But every cylinder costs 1,200 rupees. They can't afford that. Okay, so government must come strong and rapidly to meet the fuel demands, be it gas, be it solar, be it electricity, whatever. Okay, we have to push the pedal on that.
I understand. I understand the severity of the matter completely. I'll just open. I think we're running short on time. So, although I see many overlaps in every answer that the panelists have given, unfortunately, I'll have to start with closing remarks. If you had to prioritize one action that could significantly improve water security in the region over the next decade, what would it be? Let's start with Dr. Nulkar.
I think land use is what needs to be really managed. Now, with, for example, look at the Western Ghats. A lot of areas in the Western Ghats are now being sold off to private builders for second home development projects. All these second home development projects require roads, they require flattening of the land. So all the natural drainage flows are changing because of that on Sahyadris. And when the natural drainage pattern changes, it increases the erosion because there are new flows which take place. So there is more soil going to run off, and it reduces the recharge of the natural aquifers. So thus, I think how land use is changing has to be very, very closely monitored and managed there. So I think for me, that becomes the most, including, forest fires. That's also a change in land use. So using it for dairy, for grazing, all of these things.
Thank you, Dr. Nulkar. Joe?
Yeah, so I will. So if everybody's heard of AI, I'm going to use IIT as my format. I think the most important thing is an incentive intelligence technology, right? So let me just let's just to go through a use case very quickly. So Sarai, you just for your project of 1,200 acres that you did, what's the over outlay of the budget? Can you just, what's your sense? Is what is it 10 crores, 50 crores, 5 crores? What's that number?
No, it's around say 6 crores so
6
far.
crores.
And
Okay.
yeah, so it's so
So let
far.
me
And the thing is,
leave it.
Joe,
Let's assume it's even 10 crores, right? The
okay,
overall
yeah,
outlay is 10 crores. And you talked about the linkage from what you did to a second crop, right?
yes, yes,
So if I have to look at the value of a second crop, let's take any estimates. If it's a lakh, then we need 1,000 acres of second crop
yes.
downstream that will justify 10 crores if a farmer earns a lakh an acre on the second crop. If you link it up New York to your Wadi farming, which I also know you'll do the agroforestry with the cash crops, it's 2 lakhs an acre to 3 lakhs
Right.
an acre, right? So suddenly now it's a 400 to 500 acres of downstream impact that will fully pay for your project if you take the highest value of 10 crores. Now take it to what the district collector can mean. Look at the economic value that's coming in from
Mm.
every 1,200 acres. Is this value of whether it's mango or cashew or the key crops here, the business impact that's happening in the region, not what you're originally doing, but the business impact of that produce getting into the market. And now look at selling a story of not 1,200 acres, but 1 lakh acres. If I was rewilding, the kind of business increase that would happen in this region.
Mm.
That's the economic incentive now for your district collector to want to do it, right? If you now look at the corporates that are in this area who are looking to get recharge in this area, the large brands, your well data and your recharge data is provable data to them of how they can meet their recharge numbers. And that's their economic incentive to fund it. And so for me, that's the key. And I think that intelligence of economic or the incentive intelligence, nobody invests in. We think, oh, that's fun. We like to get involved in the scientific story of the bird droppings and that's wonderful. But it's in front of our face. If we build, Dr. Nulkar, your Pani Panchayat, the value it will create, like you said, for the Solapur community from a strong Pani Panchayat that ensures that good quality water goes from Punayakars to Solapuriers, uh, that's huge. And therefore, the value that you're creating from a downstream perspective of making sure you get quality water, somebody is be willing to invest in it. And for me, that intelligence is the most critical intelligence. If we build, things will fund themselves.
That's a brilliant proposition, I must say. Saryu, one quick uh, perspective about what needs to change. One priority action.
Yeah, so I think Dr. Nulkar and Joe has already spoken very, eloquently on that. But for me, I still believe I'll corollary to what Dr. Nulkar said is bring back the forest. Do whatever it takes, get the stakeholders in, get the funding in, get the implementation agencies in, get the communities and get the governments in, just get it going. So for me, bringing back the forest is absolutely key.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining and also for accommodating our last minute change in the schedule. It has been an invigorating beginning to my day. And I'm sure the sentiment is shared by everybody who has been participating. Thank you so much. We'll just take about 5 minutes to transition into the keynote address by Dr. Rajendra Singh.
Thank you so much. It was
Thank you,
wonderful
everybody.
being here. Yes.
Thanks so much. It was very enriching for me to learn from Joe as well as Saryu about their efforts. Thanks.
So, Dr.
Me too.
Nulkar, I should thank you because you have been my teacher and guru. And,
Yeah.
we've been implementing everything that you taught us.
Bhaiji is here. Namaste, Bhaiji.
नमस्ते राजेंद्र सिंह जी, कैसे हैं? आप म्यूट पे हैं। राजेंद्र सिंह जी, आप म्यूट पे हैं। सुनाई नहीं दे रहा है आवाज।
मैंने
हाँ,
आप सबको
हाँ।
सुना, अच्छा लगा
थैंक यू
जी। मैं माफी चाहूंगा कि श्वेता ने कोऑर्डिनेट किया, फिर ये कुछ टाइम में बदलाव हुआ।
For those of you who might have just joined, a very good morning again. I'm Sunidhi Hegde, your moderator for the event. This section of the webinar will be held in a mixture of Hindi and English. And as a South Indian, I truly apologize in advance for any of my errors in Hindi. Unlike the Himalayas and the Ganges Plains, the peninsular region of the country is not gifted with perennial rivers, but the western coast is blessed with one thing, and that is the Sahyadris. We are honored to be in the august presence of Magsaysay awardee Dr. Rajendra Singh, who is widely known as the Waterman of India. आज के वेबिनार में हम डॉक्टर राजेंद्र सिंह जी की उपस्थिति में हैं। डॉक्टर सिंह भारत के जल पुरुष के नाम से भी जाना जाते हैं। इनकी एनजीओ तरुण भारत संघ ने हजारों गांवों में जल संचयन और नदियों के पुनर्जीवन का काम बहुत सफलता से आगे बढ़ाया है। डॉक्टर सिंह को 2001 में रमोन मैग्सेसे पुरस्कार और 2015 में स्टॉकहोम वाटर प्राइज जैसे कई प्रतिष्ठित पुरस्कार मिले हैं। विश्व जल दिवस के आचरण में हम आज डॉक्टर सिंह हमें जल सुरक्षा के माध्यम से कैसे सह्याद्री या वेस्टर्न घाट्स को बचाया जा सकता है, इस विषय पर अपनी विचारधारा बताएंगे। चलते हैं हम हमारे भारत के जल पुरुष से पूछने की सह्याद्री के जल और भूजल संरक्षण के लिए क्या क्या किया जा सकता है। डॉक्टर सिंह, प्रणाम आपको। मैं आपको
नमस्ते।
राह फाउंडेशन की टीम और वेबिनार के सारे पार्टिसिपेंट्स की तरफ से स्वागत करती हूँ। अब आप बोल सकते हैं।
सबसे पहले तो आप सबको धन्यवाद कि आपने विश्व जल दिवस पर जल, जंगल, जमीन, इन तीनों के सेहत को, इन तीनों की हेल्थ को ठीक रखने की बातचीत शुरू की। सह्याद्री और वेस्टर्न घाट के लोगों की चेतना दूसरे क्षेत्रों से ज्यादा अधिक है। तो सबसे पहले तो सह्याद्री और वेस्टर्न घाट के लोगों के मन में अपने उस पूरी पर्वतमाला को, जो प्राकृतिक धरोहर है, जो उसकी सनातन संपदा है, जो सबके लिए हमेशा समृद्ध बना के रखने वाली है, उस संपदा को, वहां का जंगल, वहां के जंगली जानवर उन सबको बचाने के लिए वेस्टर्न घाट का सामुदायिक विकेंद्रित जल प्रबंधन को बढ़ावा देना होगा। यदि वहां का जल प्रबंधन कम्युनिटी ड्रिवन डिसेंट्रलाइज्ड वाटर मैनेजमेंट नहीं किया जाएगा तो वहां भी ये संकट बढ़ने वाला है, वो भी राजस्थान की तरह बेपानी हो सकता है। इसलिए हमें सबसे पहला काम किसी भी पर्वतमाला को, किसी भी माउंटेन चेन को यदि प्रोटेक्ट करना है तो उसके प्रोटेक्शन में सबसे ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट होता है वाटर एंड सॉइल। वहां का जो रेन पैटर्न है, उसमें से जो बारिश होती है उसको, और जो वहां की सॉइल है उसको सब जगह प्रोटेक्ट करना, उसको सब जगह बचा के रखना। उसके लिए सामुदायिक विकेंद्रित जल प्रबंधन को बढ़ावा देना पड़ेगा। और वहां का जो क्रॉप पैटर्न है वो ज्यादातर मार्केटाइज्ड हो गया है, तो वहां के क्रॉप पैटर्न को वहां के रेन पैटर्न के साथ लिंक करके ये जो अब नया क्लाइमेट चेंज का थ्रेट है उस थ्रेट को एड्रेस करना पड़ेगा। यदि हम सचमुच वेस्टर्न घाट को और सह्याद्री पर्वत को प्यार करते हैं और उसको बचा के रखना है तो हमें ये देखना और समझना बहुत जरूरी होगा कि हम वेस्टर्न घाट के इकोलॉजी को और वहां के इन्वायरमेंट को वहां के लोगों के मन के साथ कैसे जोड़ें। जब ये सब चीजें पर्वतों का और नदियों का रिश्ता लोगों को समझ में आ जाता है तो पर्वत जो बारिश को लेके आता है और नदी जो बारिश के पानी को हम सबको सींचती है, हम सबको पोषित करती है। तो पहाड़ों की हरियाली, सह्याद्री और वेस्टर्न घाट की हरियाली और उससे निकलने वाली नदियों के विकेंद्रित प्रबंधन से ही ये पर्वतमाला ठीक से प्रोटेक्ट हो सकती है, ठीक से संरक्षित हो सकती है। तो सबसे पहले वेस्टर्न घाट में अब जरूरत है सामुदायिक विकेंद्रित जल प्रबंधन की, और इस विकेंद्रित जल प्रबंधन के लिए वहां की कम्युनिटी के अंदर एक वाटर, नेचर और क्लाइमेट की से बिगड़ने वाला है। दोस्तों, मैं इतना ही कहना चाहता हूं कि वेस्टर्न घाट, सेव द वेस्टर्न घाट मूवमेंट ने उस इलाके में एक बड़ी चेतना जगाई थी, लेकिन इन दिनों वो चेतना थोड़ी मरती दिख रही है, गिरती दिख रही है। उस चेतना को दोबारा से जगाने की जरूरत है और वेस्टर्न घाट में फिर से एक सेव द वेस्टर्न घाट मूवमेंट बड़े लेवल पर खड़ी करने की जरूरत है। राहर जिस तरह से जंगलों को, नए जंगलों को लगाने का काम कर रहा है वो अच्छा काम है। राहर ने मनरेगा को एक तरह से एक टूल बना के इस काम को आगे बढ़ाया, लेकिन केवल मनरेगा के केवल राहर के करने से नहीं होगा। सब जगह पर जब कम्युनिटी अवेयर होगी तब ये काम होगा। तो राहर को इस वक्त सह्याद्री में और वेस्टर्न घाट में ये क्लाइमेट लिटरेसी का, फॉरेस्ट लिटरेसी का और पानी की लिटरेसी का एक बड़ा मूवमेंट खड़ा करना चाहिए। और वो मूवमेंट खड़ा होगा तो फिर भी जो टेक्नोलॉजी है, आज अच्छा लगा हमारे आईआईटी के दोस्त ने ठीक कहा कि टेक्नोलॉजी को हम कैसे कम्युनिटी के साथ, ये कम्युनिटी और टेक्नोलॉजी इन दोनों का इंटीग्रेशन करने की जरूरत है। टेक्नोलॉजी केवल इकोनॉमिक प्रॉफिट के लिए हमें जल्दी से कुछ काम को जल्दी करने में मदद करती है, काम हम टेक्नोलॉजी से कुछ जल्दी कर सकते हैं, लेकिन नेचर के साथ जो हमारी रिलेशनशिप है उसको डीप करने में, उसको गहरा करने में टेक्नोलॉजी ज्यादा मदद नहीं करती। उसको डीप करने में हमें कम्युनिटी का जो लेवल है सोचने का, कम्युनिटी का जो थिंकिंग है, कम्युनिटी का जो चिंतन है, समुदाय का जो चिंतन है, उस चिंतन को उस तरफ मोड़ना होगा। तभी टेक्नोलॉजी और कम्युनिटी का जो इंटीग्रेशन है वो फिर हमारे कॉमन फ्यूचर को बेहतर बनाने का, इस दुनिया को अच्छा बनाने का वेस्टर्न घाट को और सह्याद्री को अच्छा बनाने का सपना साकार हो सकता है। टेक्नोलॉजी से दुनिया में जो भी सॉल्यूशन एक्सप्लोर किए गए, उन्होंने कम समय में कुछ सॉल्यूशन दिए, लेकिन उनकी सस्टेनेबिलिटी वो पॉसिबल नहीं होगी जब तक कम्युनिटी का मन वैसा नहीं बनेगा। इसलिए हमें कम्युनिटी ड्रिवन डिसेंट्रलाइज्ड वेस्टर्न घाट एंड सह्याद्री वाटर मैनेजमेंट, फॉरेस्ट मैनेजमेंट, वाइल्ड लाइफ मैनेजमेंट, ये सारे काम हमें बढ़ाने होंगे। अभी हम वेस्टर्न घाट को और सह्याद्री को हरा भरा बना के रख सकते हैं। मेरा इस बारे में केवल एक ही संदेश है कि हम यदि वेस्टर्न घाट को और सह्याद्री को हरा भरा बनाएंगे, तो फिर वहां की नदियां बहेंगी और उससे एक पीस एंड प्रॉस्पेरिटी का, हैप्पीनेस का एक वातावरण बनेगा। तो हमें इस नेचुरल रिजुनेशन में हैप्पीनेस एंड पीस, ये दोनों इंपॉर्टेंट फैक्टर हैं। इन दोनों इंपॉर्टेंट फैक्टर को टेक्नोलॉजी के साथ, इस मॉडर्न एजुकेशन के जो खराबी है उसके साथ जोड़ के कैसे बदलाव ला सकते हैं। हमें जो हमारा इंडिजिनस नॉलेज सिस्टम था हमारे सह्याद्री में और वेस्टर्न घाट में, वहां के जो मूल आदिवासी हैं, जो कम से कम साधनों में अपने को सरवाइव करते थे, उनको हमें देखना होगा, उनके साथ हमें जोड़ना होगा कि वो कैसे इस परिस्थिति को बेहतर बनाने में उनका जो नॉलेज सिस्टम है, उनकी जो विजडम है, ऐसे विजडम कीपर्स को एक्सप्लोर करके उनके साथ कम्युनिटी में क्लाइमेट चेंज की जो लिटरेसी है, जो वाटर मैनेजमेंट की जो लिटरेसी है, जिसमें कम साधनों में हम ज्यादा अच्छा बदलाव ला सकते हैं, उस तरफ मूव करने की जरूरत है। मेरा कहना यही है कि हम इस सिस्टम को यदि रिवाइव करना चाहते हैं, तो फिर सबसे पहले जरूरी है कि वहां की कम्युनिटी को रिवाइव करें। सो थैंक यू। आगे का हिस्सा मैं जब कहूंगा, जब पहले आप इसको ट्रांसलेट कर लेंगे।
सर, मुझे लगता है कि जो पार्टिसिपेंट्स आए हैं, उनको काफ़ी लोगों को हिंदी आती है, तो अनुवाद करने की कोई ज़रूरत नहीं है, मैं ऐसा मानती
अच्छा,
हूँ।
फिर ठीक
अ,
है, फिर ठीक है।
सर, आपसे एक ऑडियंस मेंबर का क्वेश्चन है। आपको
बताइए।
कार्बन ऑफसेट्स आपका कार्बन ऑफसेट्स पर क्या अभिप्राय है?
देखिए, ऐसा है, ये जो कार्बन का एटमॉस्फेयर में जो कार्बन है, इसका सिक्विस्टेशन करने का, इसको हिंदी में कहता है सोखने का, एकमात्र रास्ता है कि जब हरियाली बढ़ती है तो एटमॉस्फेयर के कार्बन का सिक्विस्टेशन करके जो हमारे पेड़ पौधे हैं, घास है, वेजिटेशन है, वो हमारी मिट्टी में डिपॉजिट कर देते हैं। तो हमारी मिट्टी का जो गुण है वो बढ़ जाता है और उसमें से फिर एक कॉन्टिन्यूअस रिजुविनेशन की प्रोसेस शुरू होती है। आज हमने डेवलपमेंट के नाम पर जिस तरह का डिस्प्लेसमेंट ऑफ विजडम एंड डिस्प्लेसमेंट ऑफ ग्रीनरी एंड डिस्प्लेसमेंट ऑफ द सॉइल एंड ह्यूमन बीइंग, ये सब किया है, उसके कारण काफी डिस्ट्रक्शन हुआ है। उस डिस्ट्रक्शन को यदि रिवाइव करना है, रिजुनेट करना है, तो वाटर कंजर्वेशन से और ग्रीनरी के कंजर्वेशन से, ग्रीनरी के प्रोटेक्शन से हम उसको रिवाइव कर सकते हैं। तो अब हम डेवलपमेंट की जगह रिजुविनेशन की प्रोसेस शुरू करनी होगी। उसी से हम कार्बन का सिक्विस्टेशन करने का नया तरीका, आगे का तरीका आगे बढ़ा सकते हैं। नहीं तो कार्बन तो हम सब जगह, आज हमारी गाड़ियां, ये सब इंडस्ट्री, हमारे लाइफ स्टाइल में, हमारे हमारे जो जो भी कुछ एनिमल्स, ये सब जो कार्बन का लेवल बहुत बढ़ रहा है, बट कार्बन को सूखने का लेवल तो केवल ग्रीनरी है, हरियाली है। और वो हरियाली यदि एटमॉस्फेयर में से कार्बन को लेकर मिट्टी में डिपॉजिट करेगी, तो फिर वो जो रिजुविनेशन होगा उसमें से हमारा बैलेंस ठीक हो जाएगा।
Thank you, sir.
यू अंडरस्टैंड माय हिंदी? नो।
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. समझ तो सकती हूँ मैं।
अच्छा
Thank you.
अच्छा, ठीक है।
सर, मुझे और एक क्वेश्चन आया है ऑडियंस से। क्रिसेंट मून वाटर हार्वेस्टिंग सिस्टम ये डेजर्ट इकोसिस्टम से कैसे कनेक्टेड है, और आपका काम कैसा रहा है वहां पे?
देखो, जो हमारा वाटर सिस्टम है वो तो हमने मिट्टी को देखकर, जो नीचे की मिट्टी है उसको देखकर, जहां पर मोरम मिट्टी है वो डेजर्ट में छोटे छोटे जो पुराने जगह पर खड़ीन होते थे, सरोवर होते थे, ये सब डेजर्ट का अलग तरह का डिजाइन है। हमने जो वाटर कंजर्वेशन का काम किया है वो हमारी जो एग्रो इकोलॉजिकल क्लाइमेटिक डाइवर्सिटी है, उस डाइवर्सिटी की अंडरस्टैंडिंग के बाद साइट सिलेक्शन करते हैं। क्योंकि जब तक हम पानी का काम केवल एक टेक्नोलॉजी को सब जगह काम में नहीं ले सकते, एक इंजीनियरिंग को सब जगह काम में नहीं ले सकते, एक विधि को सब जगह पानी के मामले में नहीं ले सकते। इसलिए पहला पहला काम तरुण भारत संघ का ये होता है कि वो जहां भी काम कर रहा है, डेजर्ट में कर रहा है तो उसके कामों की डिजाइन बिल्कुल अलग है, वो अरावली में कर रहा है तो उसकी डिजाइन बिल्कुल अलग है, साइट सिलेक्शन अलग है, वो चंबल में कर रहा है तो अलग है। तो जहां जहां भी उसने काम किया, और यदि उसने कर्नाटक में किया तो अलग है। इसलिए वाटर मैनेजमेंट और वाटर कंजर्वेशन और नेचुरल कंजर्वेशन सब जगह एक जैसा नहीं हो सकता। सब जगह वहां की एग्रो इकोलॉजिकल क्लाइमेटिक हाइड्रोलॉजिकल डाइवर्सिटी की अंडरस्टैंडिंग के बाद ही हम ये डिसाइड कर सकते हैं कि कौन सी टेक्नोलॉजी हमें यहाँ काम आएगी। इसलिए सब जगह का हमारा सैकड़ों जगह पर काम है, तो सैकड़ों तरह की टेक्नोलॉजी और डिजाइन और इंजीनियरिंग हम काम में लेते हैं।
Thank you, Dr. Singh. I'd like to redirect the question about carbon offsets and efforts in carbon sequestration to the panel again. Joe, Dr. Nulkar, and Saryu, if you can just come in for just some time.
Yeah, I'm here.
Maybe we can start with Dr. Nulkar.
Yes. What is the question again, please?
I have a wheelchair. We don't have a wheelchair in Panvel. We have a wheelchair in Colaba.
Just a second. The question was, how many firms are looking for carbon offsets for the Sahyadri community? How do they get benefits through carbon sequestration efforts? What sort of initiatives should the community initiate to capitalize on this?
So I'm not the right person to answer this question actually, because carbon markets are a very technical issue and they're undergoing a lot of change which is happening. So the one part is the actual the process of sequestration, which is due to cultivation and plantation. But the other part is you have to get a certification for it, and these are verified agencies abroad. Very recently, the Bureau of Energy Efficiency (BEE) in India is going to be assigned the task of being allowed to certify the carbon credits. That's yet on the cards, it's yet to come up. And then the next part is to keep the carbon credits for trading in the international platforms. So that's about as much as I can say with my very limited knowledge. I think somebody else would be a better person to answer this.
So we've invested in partnerships for this. There are two or three kinds of companies that you need to do it. One is who understand the standards. There are 3 or 4 standards that exist. And each standard has their own protocols. So that's the key, is who can connect you to the right market. So we've got several partners that represent that. The second is the process to actually register your project. So that's a very complex process that can take anywhere from a year to 18 months to just get it registered and approved. And again, we're working with several companies who understand how to kind of create that process, run that process, and do it. And then the third is the technology and process to claim your benefits, right? And again, there are again very unique requirements depending on what you're doing. And again, technology is the core of it and process is the core of it. So we've been just working on putting together with different partners to understand who can play that role and stitching it together. And the good news is there is a lot of potential. There's successes in India as well that have existed. And we are looking to launch so most of our things that we launch is always collaborative launches with others who represent expertise. We see ourselves as just bridge builders and enablers. So we're looking to launch that later this year. That should be available in the market later this year.
Thank you, Joe. Sarayu, I remember we had a brief discussion about carbon offsets some time ago. Do you see synergies with rewilding efforts and sequestration programs?
So all our work so far has been on the commons. While we do have some effort that we have done with private forest, with the private individuals, but on commons, it's really a gray area right now. At least in Maharashtra, there are some officers who say you can do it. There are some officers who say you can't do it. In forest department. Zilla, I mean, the Gram Panchayat land is still a distant dream. So, we really need clarity on ground, what is possible, what is not possible. So, hence, we can't even offer it to our donors. But if there was clarity, the another thing where we need really good policy, implementation mechanisms. Where carbon offsets can be a great way to get funding in for these projects.
Thank you, Sarayu. I have one question for Dr. Nolkar. We can obviously open up the floor for reflections. Dr. Nolkar, Joe mentioned a lot about this one economic incentive that the community needs. Do you see any opportunity for a better sustainable economic model for water governance and ecological restoration combined? And as a behavioral economics enthusiast myself, I was wondering if you find any avenues there.
Yeah, cut in between a couple of times, but I believe the question would there be economic that understanding? Yeah, okay. I'm assuming that's the question. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everything has to be connected to livelihoods, and water forms the basis of livelihoods. If you look at rural poverty, the factors which influence rural poverty are the availability of water and availability of energy. And thus, if you're able to strengthen that and directly show an impact on the livelihoods of communities, then the management of these very scarce resources is going to be far better. So there are ample ways and models which can be used to increase water security with community participation and connecting it with their livelihoods there. So yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt about it.
And Dr. Nulkar, do you see any avenues for behavioral economics to develop over here?
Yes, indeed. In fact, the entire historical management of natural resources has been with social fencing. And social fencing is nothing but behavioral economics, the precursor to behavioral economics. The way you created these rules of do's and don'ts, how you connected it with values, connected it with future generations, all of this was essentially up a behavioral economist street. Right, but it was a very rudimentary form of behavioral economics, and of course that term was yet to be invented. So yes, our sacred groves are conserved with by behavioral economics.
Thank you so much. Sarayu and Joe, do you have any reflections on this?
Not anything more to add. I think no, nothing more to add actually. I think it can be all of these aspects are fundamentally about how you engage the community. And what Dr. Nalkar just said, you can draw that linkage to livelihoods. You can draw that linkage to social do's and don'ts. I think the key is that I think for me the emphasis is there's so much we can do already. and and we're already doing so much. I think it's just this a little bit of a different perspective that will really fundamentally open up the opportunities. And we're really hoping that comes together. There are so many good people doing great work, but creating a platform where some of these aspects truly celebrate what the possibilities are and create excitement around those possibilities, and communities get excited, and NGOs get excited, and people can participate to drive it in a very uniform secular way, with the livelihood dimension, the water being life dimension, with the social norms being the dimensions. I think will just align us around these things, and that's really critical.
Understood. Thank you. I think we're running short on time, so we'll take this opportunity to wrap up. डॉक्टर सिंह, थैंक यू सो मच फॉर जॉइनिंग अस. आप आए और हमारे दिन की शुरुआत आपके सुनहरे शब्दों से हो रही है. हमारे वेबिनार में आने के लिए आपको बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया. कभी आप मुंबई आए तो ज़रूर हमारे ऑफिस आइएगा. डॉक्टर सारिका कुलकर्णी माफ़ी चाहती थी कि वो नहीं आ पाई आज. सो बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद. एंड थैंक यू. Thank you to all the panelists who dropped in. A huge shout out goes to my team of supporters for the event: Dr. Sarika Kulkarni, Grish, Shweta, Monica, Tanmay, Veena, Huzefa, and Sneha. And last but not least, this event would not have been possible without the participants. So I wholeheartedly thank you on behalf of Raah Foundation's Center for Policy Research and Action. Thank you for joining in. I hope to see you soon at the next edition of the webinar. Please stay tuned for more information. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And
Thank you so much.
bye-bye.
Thank
Yeah.
you all. Bye bye.
Have a terrific day. Yeah, bye-bye.